We like trying restaurants, and I found that when we do, we end up getting in these, these phases, these trends where we find a particular restaurant that we like, and we'll go quite often, pretty regularly, or much more often than we would otherwise, and we go there a lot, and then after a while we're done, we go to something else. And one of the ones we've been going to lately, our current one, is Chick-fil-A. And I've been pursuing why that one? I mean, I like the food, but it's pretty inconvenient in terms of traveling all the way out there to it. There's not one close to us, and it's a little pricey for what it is. But I do enjoy it, and it's certainly different than what I might otherwise have taken in. I love their lemonade. I really like the lemonade, and then so we'll go there, and I don't know. There's an ambiance to it that's really fun. I mean, I'm sure they're absolutely trained so that when you say thank you, they always say my pleasure. I'm like, yeah, if you could just add my Lord to that would be awesome. But they end up that whole feeling, and so I've been going there a lot since it opened there, and as I began to wonder, it's like, well, would I qualify as a loyal customer? Would I qualify? I don't know. I suppose. I mean, I go there if you just measure loyalty in terms of going there a lot, sure. But, on the other hand, anytime I get a chance to, download an app or get a free coupon or whatever, I'll do it. I'm really in pursuit of making sure I continue to get what I want out of it and not have to put too much into it. I'd like to put in as little as possible and get as much as possible. If there's a way to get more and provide less, that would be awesome. I enjoy it. I certainly there and I like that it's there. But if at some point, I don't know, they decide lemonade isn't the biggest thing for them, or the food changes a little bit, or maybe it gets a little pricier, I don't know, it becomes somehow less convenient because we've moved or something, I'm probably done. At some point it'll get there, right? And as I share this, for those of you who have been part of Linwood before, you've heard me use this example. But when we talk about that kind of mentality, the consumer mentality, that makes sense not only for restaurants, but a lot of other things we might do. Other stores we might shop in, or other places we go, or how we choose a house or something. And we use that mentality a lot in our culture of trying to evaluate, does it get me what I want, whatever that is, and it give me in sufficient quantity compared to how much I have to put out for it? Does it do that? And yet, the danger in our culture is we begin to apply those same standards to other areas of our lives, that it's not a good choice. Specifically this morning, I'm going to be talking about the church. I'm going to be talking about the church, and I fear that for many people in our culture, that looking at the church in some ways as the same as a restaurant is a big deal. I mean, that's how we typically do it. Does it have the stuff that we like? Does it do that? Maybe, what we like is different. Maybe it's somehow more enlightened. We'll say it in nice spiritual language. Am I getting fed? Do I receive the right stuff? Do I get the right amount of spiritual goods for as little inconvenience and cost as possible? I'm already scaring people away. The thing is as I say this, I'm not really criticizing people for doing that. I guess in some sense it's rational. It makes sense. As we try to make decisions, even close around here, there are a number of churches in the area, and I know a number of the pastors there, and I think they're great churches. And as I can see how, you're making decisions somehow, and you've got to figure something out, and you got to do that some way. But I think if we get to that place where that's how we make a decision about church, and we stay in that place, that's how we continue to evaluate it, that we miss out on something huge. That we miss out on something particularly amazing. See, we're in this series where we're asking ourselves questions about our beliefs, about our practices, about our values, as ways to ask ourselves in God, what do we truly think and believe and value? What are we truly practicing? What's deep and important to us? And Jesus seems to suggest that there is a depth of community and connection that the church was built for, that we would otherwise miss out on if we treat it like we treat, rightfully so, most of the other things in our lives. Let me see if I can make the case this morning before we ask ourselves the question. Based on, Jesus and his plans for what the church would be and what that's based on and the power to live that out. Let me see if I can make the case. So let's start with the first blank in your outline. That the church is Jesus' priority. The church is Jesus' priority, his plan. It's something that he designed, that he wanted. Look here in Ephesians. We've used this verse actually a few weeks ago when we talked about spiritual gifts. But it says his intent, that's God's intent, was that now, through the church, the manifold wisdom of God should be made known to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly realms. Now what's going on here is this passage is talking about that there is this new mystery, this new revelation, literally revealing of this deep sense of what God has been doing through history. Because if we look through history, and the number of us certainly remember this, that God, even as he started early on with individuals and people, that ultimately he formed a nation, a people, the Jews, to represent him, to certainly go and make his will known, to live that out. He had a very special relationship with the Jews. And he called them his people and his nation. I keep using those words because I want to be very clear. Notice, he didn't necessarily call out individuals. I mean, it shows through Scripture that he had relationship with individuals, he had connection, but there was something about them doing it together that was vital for God. And he created this entire system. If we look through the Old Testament and we look through pieces, there are certainly lots of rules, lots of ideas, lots of ways that nation, that people was supposed to operate. And when you look at that and you think, well, how do we navigate that now? There's certainly, there's some stuff that's just civil law. Like, what do you do with a cow that's stolen? Like, how do you handle stolen cattle? I mean, there's certainly things like that they try to figure out and trying to, because they're creating a nation, how do you do some of that civil law? And then there's other parts of it that are very much about ritual and about separation and why, wearing clothing of two different fibers and things like that, about trying to figure out, ritual and separation kind of stuff. And then, of course, there's some moral law. There's things about this is what's good and this is what's right. And you have all these things in this huge system. And it is that what this passage is suggesting is that when Jesus came, it reveals what all of that was about. That all of that was to help us understand God and understand the place of who Jesus is. And then it is that magnificence that Jesus is our sacrifice, that Jesus becomes the focus, that all that stuff was to point to either our need or to even foreshadow who Jesus was. As God planned history, his point was that the church, early on, would continue to share that message. That his work, that initially held with the nation of Israel and is now going through the church, and it finally has the perfect culmination in this. For those of you who haven't figured out, that's us. That's what the building at Lindenwood looked like in 1958. And here in the middle of a field of nothing. And I say that to say that in many ways, here as Linwood, there's something to think about in reference to that. Because we often think about a church, we can think of this building, we can think of this place. And in many ways, as I look out, we have one family, and they're not here, Bert and Eleanor, who were here when this building was done. Every one of us, every single one of us, me included, has since come to this place. That other people were already gathering. It had already pre-existed, and we walked in and just tried to figure out where is our place in all this. Or maybe some of us are still trying to figure that out. No, Bill, only you. Okay. But it pre-existed. And so we often treat it as like, well, it just is. And then I'll decide whether I'm going to be a part of it and how that is or whatever. But I want you to imagine instead that the word in the Bible for church is, and you don't have to imagine because this is exactly what it means, is ecclesia. It means the gathering. That as we gather, we form the church. That in many ways it is to say that the church doesn't exist, at least the local congregation does not exist unless we gather to make that possible. That as we gather week to week, day in, day out, as we are invested and connected in one another's lives, that idea of community is what makes the church. That's the difference between a church and an organization and something else, that we are gathered. It's not a membership club. You can't just send in your dues and get your card and go, I'm a member of whatever. That we are the church insofar as we are in this together. But that strikes at one of the roots of our culture that says, I don't really need other people. I don't really care what other people think, whether they think about me or think about other stuff. I don't care about that. The thing that strikes me as just amazing about that kind of statement that says this is really about me. I don't need a church. I don't need a community. I can just worship God on my own, or I don't need to worry about what anybody else is thinking or whatever, is just try that. Just try that for a week, a day. Try one day to go an entire day without really caring what somebody else thinks. Do not try to convince anybody of anything, and don't fall victim to them trying to convince you of anything. I read a book this week that starts out just talking about that very introspective guy says, I'm going to go. I'm going to go for an entire day. And he says, I'm kind of a hermit. So this should be relatively easy. I'll read a lot and do some things, but I will go an entire day without trying to convince somebody of something, worrying about what they think, or falling victim to the things they are telling me. He failed in brushing his teeth. He talked about how he got up in the morning and he's going to brush his teeth, and he had to think about that. Am I just doing this because other people have told me to, or am I really like what? And as he's doing, they're out of toothpaste, and he yells out to his son. He says, "Who had the last of the toothpaste?" And his son responds, "Dad, we both know that's not the real question you have. You're not interested in what happened. You want to make sure it doesn't happen again, right?" He's like, "Yes." And so he says, "And so now you want me to go get the toothpaste?" "Yes, I do." Boom. He's already caring about what somebody else thinks. We do that. We live, and I don't know, metaphysically, is it because we're built for community that God invented the church? Or did He build us for community so we could have the church? Or were they both? I don't know. But the idea that we would be in deep community and connection was God's plan, was Jesus' plan for how He was going to make the manifold wisdom of God, all the various forms of who God is, make that known to the world. And I don't know what you think about that plan. If you've been around churches for any kind of length of time, you might think, okay, God, that was a stupid idea. You should have just done it yourself. Or if you can see the grace in the midst of that, I think there's something amazing about that. There's a story in Decameron by Boccaccio, and it's a story of a monk who gets saved and is with his little community in his monastery, and he says, you know what I really want to do? He says, I want to go have this visit to the Vatican. And the local parish priest was like, no, he didn't want this guy to go. He just didn't. He says, the Vatican is kind of corrupt. He's going to see these things. It's going to destroy his new faith. And he kept coming up with excuses and excuses until eventually the guy wears him down and he can't delay any longer, and he ends up going on a visit to the Vatican. And then he comes back afterwards. And in anticipation, he has this debrief. The parish priest has this debrief with him and says, so, how'd it go? He goes, it was amazing. And you think maybe he dodged a bullet. He didn't see anything. He says, so you didn't see any corruption. You didn't see any of the stuff that's going on. And the monk said, oh, absolutely. I saw tons of it. And I figured if God could work through that, he must be an amazing God indeed. And I think there's something about that. So realize that that was God's plan from the beginning. That it's something that Jesus wants. It's his plan. It's his priority. But simply because we call ourselves a church doesn't make us a church. Just because we call ourselves that, just because anybody does, that's not what makes it. That ultimately what Jesus wanted is he wants a church that's based on his values. The next blank in your outline. He wants it based on his values. And ultimately, throughout this series, as we're asking these questions, that's really what we're getting at. We're trying to ask the questions of the values that he has. But I wanted to pick this piece in particular. Even this could be its own sermon. But I think there's something pretty vital about understanding. I'm not suggesting as I read this that these are the only values Jesus cares about. But I think there's something really potent about the anti-cultural nature of what I'm going to share. What I'm going to do is just simply read this from Luke. This is Jesus talking to his disciples. Looking at his disciples, he said, "Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you who hunger now, for you will be satisfied. Blessed are you who weep now, for you will laugh. Blessed are you when people hate you, when they exclude you and insult you and reject your name as evil because of the Son of Man. Rejoice in that day. Leap for joy, because great is your reward in heaven. For that's how their ancestors treated the prophets. But woe to you who are rich, for you have already received your comfort. Woe to you who are well fed now, for you will go hungry. Woe to you who laugh now, for you will mourn and weep. Woe to you when everyone speaks well of you, for that is how their ancestors treated the false prophets." Now, you may have noticed as I read this that there are two different sections here. There's these woes and these blessings, and they're exactly parallel and exactly opposite. So I'm going to start with back and say that these are the things that he says woe to. First, we got the woe who are rich. And says, that and for the rich, what that is in reference to is this idea of the people who had the means to do what they needed to do what they wanted to do. These were the powerful people of the world. The rich and the powerful. This idea of those who are well fed now. He's talking about those who are comfortable. Those who aren't having to worry things about, who have their physical senses met. And that they are indeed comfortable. This other one may look a little bit, woe to you who laugh. That it's almost sounding like you're not supposed to have fun. This idea of laughing is not so much a laugh of joy, but is the laugh of a winner. It's the difference between somebody, when I say winner, it's not like the person who gets so excited they make a goal and they run around with their hands up, but it's the, ha, I won, you lost. You've never heard that before, okay. Play games at my house sometime. It's that sense. It's the sense of the victor over the vanquished. It's the sense of laughing because I get and you don't. And woe to you when everyone speaks well of you. So what we're seeing here is he's describing and saying, the things you value, power and comfort and winning and people speaking well of you and being praised and being adored, that all the things that your culture values, which the reason I think this is vital is because I think our culture values that too. And as we think about all these things, it says, that's not going to bless you. That's not going to be, you aren't going to be received. That's not the thing that's really going to provide depth and meaning and power in your life. It ultimately is going to fail. I mean, that's as far as your comfort's going to go if you're rich. That's as far as your pleasure's going to go if that's what you're interested in, just being well-fed now, that ultimately your laughter will end in mourning and weeping, and that's all you've got. That's all you have. And for our culture, in many ways, that's enough. But the community that Jesus is trying to build for, the community Jesus is calling us to, the community that Jesus died for, is to say this: blessed are you who are poor. Blessed are you who hunger now. Blessed are you who weep now. Blessed are people when people hate you and exclude you and insult you and reject you. Now, one of the things as we read this, we could read it like a list that says, go for these things and avoid those things. Like, go for being hungry and avoid being well-fed. I mean, it can look like that, but that's not what the Scripture's saying. It's not saying that's what we avoid, what we do. It's saying really, as you look at the depth of the values, that realize that if that's all you have, if all you're interested in is being rich, woe to you. If really what you want is power and comfort and praise and those kind of things, that's all you get, it's not going to be a blessing. It is going to be a curse. Where these aren't necessarily things we're striving. We're not striving to be poor. We're not striving to be hungry. We're not striving to eat. But it's saying, guess what? When those things happen, because there will in my kingdom, there will be poor people in my kingdom. There will be hungry people in my kingdom. There will be weeping in my kingdom. And notice he's not saying, you've got a God in heaven and you're going to be fine in the future. So just, it's okay. You should just be stoic about it. He's saying, no, you will weep. I get that. There are things in this world that are really hard and that people aren't going to give you praise. And in fact, it may even indeed reject you for trying to buy into these values. But what he says is that we will be blessed despite that. Not blessed someday. Blessed are you who are poor. For yours is the kingdom of heaven. You've got the kingdom of heaven. Poverty isn't the end-all be-all. I mean, imagine the scenario where two people who have really good jobs. I mean, it's high paying, high prestige, very secure, these kind of things, the things you want to, and two people, and because of circumstances, this isn't going to be too hard to imagine lately, they're just going to lose their job. And one of those folks is very much into the cultural values, the other list we looked at. What is there for this person? He's lost everything. Everything he really saw and that he valued and that the praise that he received and the wealth and the security and everything he had and the way he just loved how that felt. Having this when others didn't, that it's gone. And everything he values is gone, and it becomes that curse. But then imagine, on the other hand, somebody who's bought into the values that Jesus is telling us that the church is supposed to be built on, that has that can say, well, I'm going to cry. I'm going to weep. Like, it's sad that this happens, but it isn't everything. That instead, there's this depth beyond these circumstances that turns this world's values upside down. And I think we'll find that throughout Scripture as we ask ourselves these questions, as we go through this series, we look at the values that really it's calling us to something that says is so much deeper than these cultural issues. And that is the core of what we're to be about when we're together. It is to figure out together what it means to love God and to love each other. It's to just do that and live out those values. But frankly, values of caring for one another, of loving one another, of doing like there are organizations throughout our country and our world and even throughout our city that are really interested in doing that. There's certainly church, and we fail all the time. We fail to live that out. So how are we supposed to possibly get the power, recognizing what human nature is, to live like that? The church is powered by Jesus' gospel. Understanding the root and the nature of the gospel of Jesus is what allows us to live through that power. I've been really fascinated lately by the French Revolution. And I don't know a lot. I don't know. Maybe it happened too late to ever show up in my history books. But as I remember bits and pieces of just catching, what I'm fascinated by is the French Revolution was very much supposed to be this revolutionary new world of having life like it's really supposed to be. And they fought for these values of liberty and equality and fraternity. Or, as they say in French, liberty and equality and fraternity. Actually, I don't know what the French is. You got the French? Go for it. It's exactly the same. And they wanted this. And how do you go about doing that? We're going to have this. We really want brotherhood, and we want equality, and we want freedom, and we're really going to get it. And so you know how we start? We kill all the people who disagree with us. That's how we make sure we're the same. We get everybody in a line, and we chop off their heads so that we don't have to deal with their opinions and their ideas and their stuff. And we have everybody all the same, and we all agree to the same thing. And then we'll have this utopia, which didn't happen either. Despite their idea of like, let's just get rid of everybody who doesn't agree with us. Let's just get rid of them and have this new power structure. It's still, it's not there. So, look at what Ephesians 4 says. Instead, speaking the truth in love, we will grow. The idea that we as followers of Christ are going to grow in this, to become in every respect the mature body of Him who is the head, that is Christ. From Him, the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself in love as each does its work. That is the vision that Jesus has for the church. Now realize where it starts is that we see Christ at the head. That we see Christ at the very beginning of it. That this has to be what Christ wants. What joins us together is what Christ longs for us. That ultimately we are joined by that allegiance. Now that might seem, well, of course. Doesn't every church say that? I mean, they have crosses everywhere and we all say that. But really realize what deeply at its root we are saying. Every organization, every working group, everything is really in many ways about like the French Revolution. Maybe not as violent, but really we want the people who agree with us and get rid of the people who don't. We long to do that we just have people that are like us, either culturally or socioeconomically or who have those, that believe the same things we do and all that. And we'll create that. And once we all agree, then we'll be able to move forward. And we've got to be really careful about who we let in because they may disagree and that will mess things up. So instead what? We just want everybody to be like us, right? But the truth is even in this room, chances are, outside of the context of Christ, we wouldn't all be friends. See what I did there? In fact, I love the way D.A. Nixon put this. You know, ideally, the church itself is not made up of natural friends. It's made up of natural enemies. What binds us together is not common education, common race, common income levels, common politics, common nationality, common accents, common jobs, or anything of the sort. Christians come together not because they form a natural collocation, but because they've been saved by Jesus Christ and owe Him a common allegiance. In light of this common allegiance, in light of the fact that they have all been loved by Jesus Himself, they commit themselves to do what He says, and He commands them to love one another. In this light, they are a band of natural enemies who love one another for Jesus' sake. I hate you, but I love you anyway. I mean, ultimately, isn't that crazy? It's like saying if we were to adopt the world standards, that we would have nothing that would bring us together, nothing that would hold us in common. Really, I mean, we might have a few groups, and it's like, yeah, I kind of like you. I don't like you very much, but, whatever. We've all had, but really when it comes down to it, it's like, yes, we find ways to love one another, to put up with one another. Remember the passage. That it is about growing to become in respect. That is about maturing. And as a church, that we have, each of us are at different levels of maturity. And I hate that term, like different levels, like, one of us is an 8, another is a 7, because it's never even that simple. It's like one of us is an 8 in this area, but a 2 in this area. And a 6 over here and a 9 there, and like all over the map. And then somebody else has different things. And at any given point, we can say, this person is so mature in Christ, but boy, that was a boneheaded thing they did there. And this person's such a bonehead, but man, that was really wise. And we mix those kind of people up that don't necessarily have all these other things in common, and we say, love one another. And it's possible. Failingly, messed up. Sometimes we hurt one another, sometimes by what we do, sometimes by what we didn't do. But we got a chance. And if you see that working, if you see a bunch of people that are trying to figure out what it means to love God and love one another, and they're willing to do that and commit and be patient and figure it in, day out, and week in, week out, and just say, what does that look like? You are seeing a community that Jesus died for. You are seeing the kingdom of God in action. And that's not going to happen if you keep looking around for a church that's going to meet your needs. If you're going to look for the church that's already mature. If you're looking for the one that says, hey, they've got it figured out and they can make everything I need. And then as soon as you find out they don't have everything you need and you go off to the next one, you're never going to build what God has called us to build. That respect, that growth, that maturity in what it means to love God and love one another. My guess is, for the most part, since you're all here, you probably buy into that a bit. And so what you do is you just record this sermon and give it to all the people who weren't here this morning. But it does bring up this idea. Let me start with just the question. Do I believe the church is God's primary way to accomplish His purposes on earth? This is a belief statement. Do I believe that? Do I really believe that? But let me suggest one of the criteria for your belief. One of the ways you can test your sense of whether or not you believe that as we go into open worship and you think about this question that says, do I believe it? Then one of the tests will be, if you think that is indeed God's primary way, and you're interested in God's purposes on earth, then your local congregation, your local church becomes a place where you try to live that out. As I look around, I see so many people with gifts that have responded to the needs and the ministry here at Linwood. And so one of the dangers of speaking the way I do, where I try to look people in the eye, is you can be like, he's talking about me. And I don't want to do that, but I do have some sad news. That a prominent member has passed away this week. That member was someone else. Someone else has died this week. Someone's passing has created a vacancy that's difficult to fill. Else has been with us for so many years. And someone did far more than a normal person share of the work. Whenever there was a job to do or a class to teach or a meeting to attend, one name was on everyone's list. Someone else will do it. It was common knowledge that someone else was among the most generous givers. Whenever there was a financial need, everyone just assumed that someone else would make up the difference. Someone else was a wonderful person, sometimes appearing to be superhuman. But a person can only do so much. And were the truth known, everyone perhaps expected too much of someone else. And now someone else is gone, and we wonder what we're going to do. Someone else left a wonderful example to follow, but who's going to do the things that someone else did? Think you get the point? But it's worth considering. Is this a value that you have? Is it a belief that you have? And if so, what does that mean in terms of our community of faith and what God has called us to do? And how do we live that out day in, day out, week in, week out? Let's sit with that during open worship. And I'll close this in a couple minutes.